Hello and welcome to Vapor. On today's show, I'll be explaining to you how to avoid getting burnt coils and giving you multiple examples on how to do so. So, without further ado, let's jump right into the video.
The first thing you can do to avoid getting burnt coils is to avoid sucralose. Sucralose is an artificial sweetener used in e-juice, and after using it just for a day, you might notice a little bit of black goop starting to gather around your coil. You taste a little of that sweetness when you vape, but a significant portion of the sucralose in your e-liquid sticks to your coil and forms a black crust. If you use a sweetened e-liquid, you'll begin to notice a change in the e-liquid's flavor after just an hour or two. The e-liquid will start to taste like caramelized sugar. Eventually, the burned flavor becomes so pronounced that it's practically all you taste. You may even feel a harsh burning sensation in your throat, and at that point, really have no option except to replace your coil. The second thing you can do to avoid getting burnt coils is to take a pin and prick at the cotton on the sides where the juice would soak into the atomizer. By pricking upward and downward on that cotton and loosening up, because it's so hard packed in there from when they made the atomizer, you'll loosen up that cotton so it starts to get fluffy and stick out slightly. And by doing this, it'll allow the atomizer and cotton to absorb the juice more freely and be less likely to have a burnt coil. Also, in the event of having lackluster coils, pricking the cotton will also up the flavor of the coils too. The third way to avoid getting burnt coils is to stay in the recommended wattage range. And by this I mean, when you look at the side of your atomizer, it has usually stamped into it or printed on it what the ohm resistance is of that coil, and usually right by that it'll show the wattage range that is recommended for that coil. By staying within that recommended wattage range and not exceeding it, you're less likely to get a burnt coil and torch that cotton. So always stay within your recommended wattage range. The fourth way to avoid getting burnt coils is to prime the coils. And by this I mean taking the coil and your bottle of juice and applying juice to the coil around the inside of it before you ever put that coil into your RTA. By doing this, it gets it saturated so that it's more likely to accept the juice from the outside as well as on the inside. So when you take that first initial couple hits of it, you don't run the risk of getting a dry burn. So always prime your coils. The fifth way you can avoid getting burnt coils is to slowly ramp up your wattage. And by this I mean starting at a low wattage and vaping on it for a little bit before you take it up a couple notches and vape on it at a little bit higher level, as opposed to just taking it directly to the wattage you normally use that coil at. Because if that coil isn't broken in properly, you run a higher chance of prematurely burning the cotton in that coil, and due to that, you're going to lower the life expectancy of that coil. And just by simply ramping up that wattage, you can totally avoid that and break in that coil properly. The sixth way to avoid burnt coils is to allow for a break-in time. Now, as explained in number 5, you can slowly ramp up the wattage for it as you go, but also just time in general will allow for it to break in. If you go directly after placing that coil in the atomizer to go into the temp you normally run at it, like I said before, you up your chances of burning that cotton. But you don't have to necessarily ramp up your wattage per se if you just give that coil time to absorb that liquid thoroughly. So the longer that liquid has time to absorb into all that cotton, saturating it good and proper, it gives it enough time for it to break in. Now, depending upon the coil, depending upon the cotton, there's a lot of factors that go into it. You know, it might only take a couple hours for it to break in. It might take 3 days for it to break in. But if you know your coils because you use them all the time, you'll kind of get a feel for how long it takes to properly, time-wise to break in those coils so that you can avoid torching that cotton. The seventh way to avoid getting burnt coils is don't let your tank run dry. And by saying run dry, I don't even mean like bone dry. If you look at your atomizer in its position in the tank or pod, you'll notice where the little cotton is on the side that absorbs into the atomizer. Well, you really shouldn't even let the e-liquid get below that cotton, because already at that point you're risking the cotton not being saturated enough and the potential of that cotton getting torched. So it's imperative to always watch your liquid level and don't let it run below those absorption ports on the atomizer. The eighth way to avoid getting burnt coils is to avoid chain vaping. And for those of you who don't know what chain vaping means to just take a hit off your pod or your RTA or RDA, whatever, and then not even wait after you take another hit, and you just repeat the process over and over, as opposed to like waiting 30 seconds or a minute in between, giving those juice ports ample enough time to absorb more e-liquid back into the cotton so that they're properly saturated. So if at all possible, you should avoid chain vaping, and that will also help you to avoid getting burnt coils. Ninth way to avoid getting burnt coils is to do a dry pull to prime the coil. For those of you who do not know what a dry pull is, that would be taking a drag off of your pod or your RTA and not hitting the firing button. So why would you not hit the firing button? Well, because the airflow caused by the suction that you're creating will cause the juice to come into the cotton and help prime that coil. Especially in the case where people like to chain vape. If you want to chain vape, which I don't recommend, but if you do, between each hit that you take off of that, you should do a dry pull. Do a dry pull just as long as you would do a normal pull off of it. And by doing that, you'll keep that cotton saturated and you'll help to avoid getting burnt coils. So chain vape, dry pull, prime the coil, good to go. The 10th and final way to avoid getting burnt coils is something called the coil lottery. Now, each coil atomizer that you buy is a little bit different, even the one next to it packaged in the same set. And each brand makes different style atomizers, which have different style coils, which have different style cotton, and all of them are not created equal. Some coils you'll get like 9 out of 10 are just absolutely perfect. But then you get some coils that just are inferior, where you might get 9 out of 10 that are just pretty much crap. So once you buy your device and you use those coils, you'll kind of get a feel for after a while just how good the quality of those coils is. And if you find yourself getting burnt out coil after burnt out coil after burnt out coil, maybe it's time to just get rid of that RTA and atomizer and look for one where other people are saying that they are getting good results. And also, by following some of the tips I gave before, such as pricking the cotton, that can also make a kind of so-so atomizer into one that's actually fairly decent. Granted, like I said, they're not all created equally, so the lifespan of the coils is also something that can vary drastically. Some coils might last you a week, some coils might last you 6 weeks, so just bear that in mind.
So I hope you liked today's video, and I hope you find the information helpful in the future for all the coils you use. Hopefully you won't get more burnt ones. I mean, coil lottery, it is what it is, but I have not gotten a burnt coil in a very long time. Knock on wood. But if you found this video informational, you might want to think about subscribing and hitting that notification bell on the bottom right side of the screen. You know what to do. Later, vapors.